Hi and welcome to this fourth and last Lunch Bytes discussion in London. My name is Melanie Buehler and I'm the curator of the Lunch Bytes series. Before I hand it over to Elvia, who will be chairing the event today, I would like to give you a little bit of context to the Lunch Bytes project and introduce today's speaker very briefly to you. So, Lunch Bytes is a series of discussions dedicated to art and digital culture. The project was initiated in 2011 when I conceptualized it for the Goethe Institute in Washington, D.C., as well as the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. The project today, or the event today, is part of the European edition of this project, which started in earlier this year, in the beginning of 2014. Throughout this year, Lunch Bytes events have been taking place and are still happening in the following cities: in Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Dublin, Glasgow, Helsinki, London, and Stockholm. The Goethe Institute always collaborates closely with partner institutions, as you see them listed on the slide. This European chapter of the project will be concluded with a conference in Berlin in the spring next year at the Haus der Kulturen der Welt on March 20th and March 21st. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be working with three partner institutions here in London, namely Arcadia Missa, the ICA, and Goldsmiths. Thank you very much for this partnership. So, today's talk is entitled Language. And Elvia Wilk, who is sitting at the edge of this lineup of speakers, will be moderating the event today. Elvia is a writer and editor based in Berlin. She writes both critical and creative texts at the intersection of architecture, art, and technology. After her introduction, we will be hearing a presentation by Florian Cramer, who is a reader for new media and their impact on arts and design at Willem de Kooning Academie in Rotterdam, at the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences. His presentation will focus on the textual visual culture that has emerged as part of online image boards. He will contextualize this particular language by drawing on literary theory. After this, we will be hearing a presentation by Holly Childs, an editor, artist, writer, and curator based in Melbourne and currently living in London. She will read an excerpt from her newest book, which is to be released next month, entitled Denklands. Departing from this, she will discuss how the use of language in her writing relates to internet culture. And after her presentation, we will be hearing from David Jablonowski, sitting right there. David is an artist, a German-born artist living in Amsterdam at the moment. And he will talk about two of his recent works that reflect on how we engage with information online and how he translates this specific engagement with language in his installations and sculptures. Last but not least is Cally Spooner, an artist based in London. Discussing her work, she will reflect on the relationship between YouTube comments, social media, and the language and performance of melodrama. We will be hearing short presentations of each of them before they will engage in a panel discussion, which you are very welcome to join as well. And before I hand it over to Elvia, I would like to thank everybody involved in organizing this discussion. My colleagues at the Goethe Institute in London, Eva Schmidt, the head of the cultural department in London, as well as Mario Schroff, who is cultural coordinator at the Goethe Institute in London, Matthew Fuller, professor at Goldsmiths, Roja Farkas and Tom Clarks from Arcadia Missa. And of course, where is she? Rosalie Dubal, who I can't see right now. Thank you so much for co-organizing this event. And now, you.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you all for coming. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the topic today of language by starting with an idea from a text by today's first speaker, Florian Cramer. The text is called What is Post-Digital? And in it he points out that the terms digital and analog don't technically mean what they have come to mean in colloquial usage. In a technical sense, digital is not necessarily anything electronic, nor for that matter anything new, but rather a general term for a type of computation that relies on dividing things into discrete units, whereas analog is information that hasn't been chopped up to be precisely countable. For instance, a guitar is digital because it has frets to divide the notes into measurable units, whereas a violin is analog because there are no definite markers between the notes. But today when we talk about digital in the sense of digital culture, we're usually talking about a specific time period characterized by things like algorithmic processing of information, prosumerism, and big data, a media period that comes necessarily after the analog. That temporal structure, which is obviously ahistorical, defines the scope of the ways we use and talk about digital media, so-called digital media, including constructions of new and old, pre and post, high and low tech, and the various other binaries that follow that logic. I bring up that basic slippage in terminology, first of all, because this is a discussion about language, and so I think it's a good idea to pay attention to the terms that we're using to frame the discussion, but also because it opens a door to consider the interaction between digital technology and language beyond the binary, and to think about the relationship between the mechanics underpinning the use of language in relation to the social evolution of the written word. In a time when text can be written and read by machines, what does literacy mean? How relevant today are categories like reader and writer, poetry and prose, or the textual and the visual? How do linguistic structures fit into the graphically based interface? Will code languages become as much of a lingua franca for certain communities as English has already become? I think by working with those questions today, we'll get an idea of how artists, writers, and everyone else are working with and against the reality that language in the digital era has become commodifiable data, whether technically analog or digital. So now I'll hand it over to Florian.
Okay, thanks. I'm looking for the remote. Thanks. Okay. So first of all, I need to apologize because I think I wrongly prepared my talk. When I'm talking about memes, image boards in continental Europe, it has been my experience that no one working in arts, design, and media studies knows them, really. And I think it has to do also with the linguistic gap, because this is mostly an English language phenomenon, and I've been told by colleagues in preparation of this just this afternoon, no, it's not like this in the UK. So I will speed up my basic introduction and hopefully have some more time to go into depth of reflection. So very quickly, image boards are very simply designed websites where everyone can anonymously post images and short text. And they roughly exist since the early 2000s, but what perhaps is little known is that they originally came from Japan and are very closely linked to manga and anime culture. And that the best known image board today, the American website 4chan.org, which I'm showing here, has actually been an adaptation even of the technical software of Futanari Channel, a Japanese image board that pre-existed it. Now, this is something that has been going on for more than 10 years. And what we can also see is, since I said everyone can anonymously post, so we also see the identities of the people posting here on 4chan, and they're anonymous. And again, what few people know, at least in continental Europe, is this is where the anonymous movement comes from. It's simply the people who hung out on 4chan and by default were appearing as anonymous. And so also the whole iconography and first organization of the anonymous movement came from the image board 4chan.org. Now, 4chan also was the birthplace of image macros or memes. The notion of the meme comes from the British evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, and was already coined in the 1970s as the idea of a kind of self-replicating unit of information. I won't go into details here, but I would even say that one should consider this Dawkins notion rather as a point of departure than actually a kind of fixed definition of what a meme is today. I would say it's just like the term punk meant something different in American garage rock than it meant in British culture, in British punk culture. So there is a book by the MIT Press by Limor Schiffman about memes, and I think it's very misleading because it insists on this kind of Richard Dawkins definition. Now, the motives of memes, well, this, for example, I think British viewers will know it. It comes from V from Vendetta, then from the British comic went into the Hollywood movie and then back into 4chan and then ended up on the streets of the Occupy movement. This is a very nice example of what in art history would be called a symbolic form, the kind of transition and translation of an element of visual culture through different contexts. But what we see on 4chan, here we have another such 4chan discussion, is that most of the material is taken from popular culture and is being reappropriated into something that is humorously grotesque. It has its own visual linguistic slang, its own spelling rules. As we can see, for example, this is a very popular meme, and actually the image is taken from a Japanese manga, and then this is the typical kind of 4chan image board slang. And this is also, of course, part of the subculture, because if you will participate in 4chan and you somehow imitate it, but you don't do it right, it's just like in any other subculture, be it Gothic, be it graffiti or whatever, that you won't be accepted until you learn the rules of that community and you speak the same language. Now, just to go to cycle through this particular meme, which is one of the most popular and also it's a little bit staid, I must say, it's already a couple of years old meme. I like it nevertheless. For example, you've got this here. As a variant on it. You've got this, I had to take it from my London presentation. Then the memes even become recursive. Meme center, feature my funny memes. So this is where it becomes almost conceptualist. Here where you see how it actually, just with the anonymous movement, breaks from the confined space of the image boards into so-called real life. This is also why I think we live in times where these kind of classical separations between a so-called internet culture or cyber culture and everyday culture really don't make sense anymore. And I think that memes are an excellent example of this kind of spillover. I love this meme because that also shows you that memes can be really conceptual art, and this is also why I called my talk in my presentation memes, as something in between or both of poetry and populism. Now, what memes, the classical memes immediately remind you of, if you've studied art history, is Renaissance emblems, because the way that a classical emblem is structured is with a so-called motto. Let's go back, I think, if you look at the previous memes. You have a motto on top in a Renaissance emblem. Then you have the so-called pictura, the picture, in the middle, and the so-called subscriptio, the subscription underneath. And we exactly see this kind of three-way divide in the memes as well. And I'm really, it strikes me why no art historian has picked that up yet. I think the missing historical link between, let's say, the emblematic tradition, which roughly ended in the 17th century, and now the 21st century phenomenon of the image board memes, is that of the caricature. Because what happened in cultural history is that emblems were basically, or were even prime examples of allegorical art. And allegorical art was something that was phased out roughly in the 18th century in European art in favor of different forms of representation, because the allegory was most typically associated with for example, Christian allegory, Christian meanings. So they also presupposed a complex knowledge of a system of meanings for the ones who was, for example, looking at an allegorical painting in a church context or at an emblem. The emblems are also, they look weird to us today because they presuppose so much knowledge, and one of the few, let's say, standard allegorical meanings that we're still familiar with in a Western context is, for example, a heart for love. Yeah, but imagine that you had a system of like 10,000s of such meanings, so that these could be easily decoded. We see the same happening in image board culture today, namely there's a really complex systems of meanings that the participants of that subculture can decode and contextualize, and where I see in an art school and media theory context, people really struggle to get them because they're not socialized in it. For me also a really an indication of a shift in Western culture, where, for example, the influx of Japanese visual culture really profoundly changes the way people are being socialized with visual meaning. Walter Benjamin, the literary and, let's say, proto-media theorist, already tried in the early 20th century to kind of re-establish the allegory. The allegory had been phased out in Romanticism, and he tried to kind of, to reconstruct it or to give it back its place by saying the allegory is a figure of thought that celebrates the fragment and the ruins, because this connection is part of its setup. And I think that this is a very useful way of thinking about allegories that also applies to this. Now, I mentioned that we have the grotesque humor in memes, and that leads us to another literary theory, namely the most influential literary theory about the grotesque by the Russian literary theoretician Mikhail Bakhtin from the early 1930s, namely his theory of carnival. It's an obvious association, but nevertheless may be useful to mention it. Its definition was, I quote, "a boundless world of humorous forms and manifestations opposed the official and serious tone of medieval, ecclesiastical, and feudal culture." Now we see, with Anonymous in particular, we again see a form of carnival. And I think we can also see that this dynamic of image boards as a form of carnival that is undermining official and serious tones, but let's say not of the church or the aristocracy, but rather of globalized capitalism. And the way how the Anonymous movement in particular has smoothly, let's say, flown into the Occupy movement is a strong indication of that. Now, Bakhtin, in his classical works, differentiates three forms of cannibalistic discourse, how he calls it. And number one is ritual spectacles. Number two is comic verbal compositions. And number three, various genres of billingsgate, such as curses. Now, I think we can clearly see memes as in these three definitions as comic verbal compositions, and the spectacle then, for example, on the carnival of Anonymous on the streets. And Bakhtin characterizes these comic verbal compositions as parodies, both oral and written, in Latin and in the vernacular. And here we have a new form of vernacular that has been created. For Bakhtin, the sexual grotesque and the obscene is a vital part of this language. And he later extends it to the birth of the modern novel. For example, the grotesque in 18th century novels by Lawrence Stern. And he defined this language as heteroglossic and a living language. And again, we have a living language here, and also in the sense that it traverses, it's a particular slang that is in between oral and written. It's also one of the, I would say, the fundamental ruptures that the internet has brought for language is that it has done away with a fundamental split between written language as something that's official and published and gone through institutions, and oral language as the vernacular that's informal. Now we have informal published language for the very first time. That for me would be the main break and or innovation brought by the internet. I'll do it quickly. In the 1960s, French literary theoretician and feminist Julia Kristeva rediscovered Bakhtin. He had not been published for several decades, and gave him her own spin in bringing his theory together with her own theory of literary avant-garde and what she called revolution in poetic language. And this is interesting because she applies it to a concept of poetry, whereas Bakhtin explicitly said, I'm not interested in poetry, only in prose, in novels. And he saw poetry always as the high form that didn't have that kind of vernacular. Now, let me quote Kristeva, what she wrote in 1967 in a very weird text that I love. It's one of her most hilarious texts that she ever wrote. Word, dialogue, and novel has been totally ripped apart by Alan Sokal and Jean Bricmont because it contains all kinds of false mathematical formulas. But nevertheless, it's very useful, I think, in reflecting these phenomena. She says, a carnival participant is both actor and spectator. He loses his sense of individuality, passes through a 0 point of carnivalesque activities, and splits into a subject of the spectacle and an object of the game. With a carnival, the subject is reduced to nothingness, while the structure of the author emerges as anonymity that creates and sees itself created as self and other as man and mask. Right? For me, this is an almost, it's a piece of genius and really a kind of prophetic vision of what became the anonymous movement then more than 30 years later. Now, let me just, I have to hurry. The last thing that I want to mention, that there is, of course, while celebrating image boards and anonymous and image memes, there is a duality or an ambiguity that you can already see in the writings of Bakhtin, because both Kristeva and Bakhtin also echo 19th century European romanticism and its celebration of folk culture. Think of the Grimm brothers, among others. And in Bakhtin in particular, with his 1930s writing, there's also a certain embrace of 1930s cultural populism. I think we can say the same about image boards, that there are a form of contemporary populism that is both, can be both subversive and reactionary. And a good example for the reactionary side of this culture is, well, the fappening and the so-called Gamergate, which I think some of you are familiar with. The Gamergate also, for a large part, had its origin on 4chan, and the fappening as well. The fappening files, the nude, hacked pictures of Hollywood celebrities, posted as a kind of anti-feminist statement, but of course also disruption of official discourse, were posted on 4chan. That's it.
Hi. I have one. Thank you. I'm going to read an excerpt from a book that I've written called Danklands, that Arcadia Missa are publishing, and that will be released in December. Danklands in general centres concepts of dredging and resurfacing, and I explore these themes in both the form and the content, if those two concepts can be separated. I'm interested especially in content that reroutes its form, like a makeup tutorial that is also subliminally a climate change awareness campaign or a self-defense for women pep talk. So yeah, see also, I hate it when something scary pops up out at the end of a YouTube video, but I also kind of love it, or desire that to happen sometimes, or Aurelia Go saying always scared amateur porn is going to turn out to be a snuff film. Okay, yeah, so this is a reading that is this kind of makeup tutorial that maybe does other things as well. Makeup tutorial. E-create the universe every morning when you wake up and kill it every evening. Dream girl told me to pare back the makeup, look back at it. Logging into Skype, oral cue in background. Hello to my sexy viewers. This is Augustine, and today I'm going to show you how to achieve a very cute makeup look for seafaring or lounging by the ocean, or even just for when you're dredging a swamp or lake. Hold lipstick right up to the mirror with your hand behind. The color is peach. World Trade Center Memorial, salmon. I'm going for a deeply oceanic look today, so I'm starting with a BB cream mixed into your regular foundation. If you're going to be using this look in an area of planet Earth that has a lot of ozone layer depletion, like for instance, you might be in Antarctica. Oh, sorry, I'm distracted just mixing up this foundation. You might be in Antarctica. Like maybe you're a scientist who's just started dating again after a massive breakup, or doing some whaling, or actually just on a regular cruise down there. You might want to make sure you're using a BB cream that has a high SPF rating. And I'm here in Melbourne, where it's sometimes very sunny. So I'm using an 89 plus sun blocking BB cream with a light tint and gentle shimmer finish. Again, if you're in one of those areas with the ozone depletion issues, that is to say a hole, you're going to maybe need to be investing in a hat of some kind. And I have provided some links in the About section just below. But let's just do this, like spectacular body sunscreen, just such as a hat or a UPF, ultraviolet protection factor, SPF 50 plus or above. So that might be a lycra in contrast to a thin white cotton t-shirt, which has a UPF of like about 5, which allows 1/5 of the sun's UV through, even more when the thin white t-shirt is wet. So if you're going to be doing a Gatorade ice bucket challenge or hanging out with college guys and more, please make sure that you put on the sunscreen before you put your t-shirt on, and then again when you get back out, because we all know the dangers with the sun. Be safe. And if you're a vegan, make sure that you're using an eyeliner made with synthetic wax, which, as you know anyway, is plastic or petrol. Okay, so next I'm using a small amount of concealer. It's okay to point the eyeliner pencil directly into your eyeball during the application. I have done this before many times, and I have tested with many different products, and it doesn't hurt or leave any permanent marcations or dents. I like to fill them in longer than they normally are because it makes my eyes look a lot bigger, and as an added bonus, you'll keep your brows from creasing and going away during the day with the wear and the tear. So mix it in with a sponge. I'm using a translucent powder, but you can use whatever you want to drag the colour through. I'm also using an eyeshadow shade, which is called Slut Shame. I just love this colour. It's a light pink kind of shimmer. I also like Beaches and Cream, which is a very cute play on words, and it's also another eyeshadow. Pat that on, but don't go above the crease. Wayans Brothers White Chicks. So what we're doing is patting, not dragging, and then you select your liquid eyeliner in a medium grey, and I like to use this colour over a darker colour such as a khaki or a navy, because as far as I'm concerned, subtlety is the key to this kind of look. Whether you're on the yacht, on a pier, add some depth and some darkness to the eyes, above and beyond and all the way up to the hairline. Free dive in with the same grey eyeliner. I want you to draw a small anchor, or if you're not that confident at drawing, you can do an M seagull, like an M bird, but the goal is not to look like you just stepped out of a goth club, unless that's what you're going for, in which case make sure you draw on your eyebrows, eyeliner, and other such markings as dark and as thick as possible, but also kind of thin. It's a very versatile look. As you can see, to soften everything up, just take your fluffy brush and do little circles. There's an Urban Decay Rapture. Just dab a little bit of red eyeliner into the waterline, and this will give you a really defined look that will just make this look a super sexy look. I love it. Make it pop. Make sure you use some waterproof mascara if you think you might be going into the water, or NARS Laguna bronzer down your nose, on cheeks and your temples, and deep into the crevices of nostrils and ears. I like to get a bit of definition. Places are so humid. You might feel as though your face is literally melting off, and so I find that if I use wax-based products, especially on my orifices, my look in general stays a lot perfecter for a lot longer. This is a humidity and waterproof way to prime your face, and the benefit is you stay flawless. Give it something to grab onto, like this sensual silk enhancer, and also remember with this look to drink a lot of sparkling liquids, any kind of water or vitamin anything. You'll get this kind of fresh sort of you'll get this sort of fresh sort of dew look to the pores, this kind of effervescence that sort of just like lifts your face off, and even more so through your Google Glass, AR iPhone applications, or anything to do with DMT is going to seem really good with this underwater look, stranded desert island, palm tree, skeletons, and you can see this sparkling shimmer effect from the liquids and the ozone depletion if I just zoom in for 1 second. Be careful to be selective with what you want to conceal. Your skin still needs to breathe and your eyeshadow will thank you for it later. A woman wearing a red suit walks in behind Augustine and into a cubicle to the left of the shot, a stall. If you have a condition such as electromagnetic sensitivity, you might want to use a physical sunscreen such as zinc, which doesn't absorb the sun rays but reflects them. And next, we're going to use a wax-based eyeliner pencil. I think I already talked to you a little bit about this. Urban Decay and Death Zone Forever both contain products such as microcrystalline wax, which is important because you're going to be on the deck and you're probably going to be sweating and in other uncomfortable positions with the college guys, and you probably just don't want to. Feel free to tell them no whenever you want. I'm just going to keep it as is for now, but if there ever is a problem, I carry broken glass in shards on my person and in my bag, and you can watch my other tutorial on soft targets, including death point strikes, vibrating palm technique, and of course literally turning the gun around in combat. And that tutorial, you might have noticed, has a Katy Perry soundtrack, Part of Me, dragged out to about 42.78 beats per minute to keep it from being removed from YouTube, because you know they are quite strict on the copyright law. So you can click to view that video. The link should be just here. Augustine points to the air just above and to the right of her face. I also run you through on that video common areas on your body that can protect you in almost every context. For example, the shock-absorbing lungs, the muscular diaphragm, and the strong ribcage and breastbone you have just here. 5-point palm exploding heart technique, Uma Thurman crying, and at the end, Beatrix does not kill Bill in Kill Bill 2. Okay, so now I just like to use a Givenchy mascara just to finish it off. Make sure it is a smear-resistant one, because I don't want to joke lightly about what's going to happen to you in a patriarchal society like this one we're all living in. And these things do happen every day. So just buff the colour out until it's nice and smooth. Pressure point, vital contact, tender spot, and you're done. So thank you for watching my video. I'm Augustine. Remember to keep your thumbs up. And if you like, you can follow me on Google+. This has been created by Q&U, and I'll see you again soon. Ciao, or bon voyage if you're actually cruising. Augustine waves at herself in the mirror and leaves the bathroom, walks back to the office. Okay, so the book is called Danklands, and it's all set in Melbourne Docklands. And within Danklands, there are actual physical instances of dredging and resurfacing, such as the dredging of pollution control pond Q, which is an actual water form within Melbourne's Docklands. I've got a picture of it. Oh no, wait, sorry, the wrong one. Where's the Catherine thing? Okay, cool. And then, okay, so there's the dredging of Control Pond Q, and then there's also the resurfacing of the ice in Medibank Ice House, which is an indoor rink that's a couple of minutes walk away from Control Pond Q. Formally, some text within Danklands is also necessarily glossed over, censored, and redacted, such as a description of an artwork by Catherine Botten that has not yet been released by the artist Catherine Botten. And it may never be released in real life, but she has loaned the work to me to hang in the apartment of two of the characters in the book. So yeah, she let me put it in but wouldn't let me release any of the details, so it's like a giant Catherine Botten redacted hanging on the redacted over the redacted. I think then there's just more pictures of the control pond for a minute. Okay, so there are also several actions and scenes that are repeated during the book. So, like, I'm doing this like formal and content judging and resurfacing. Sorry, I'm like still in the Augustine character, so I'm doing a lot of likes. But who's kidding? I do a lot of likes all the time. So there are also several actions and scenes that are repeated throughout the book, or repeated with minor alterations, or later re-examined using completely different words or phrasing. Something like when you read a breaking news story half an hour after you first read it, and there are small pieces of extra information that have been dropped into like basically every paragraph. Within this work I'm kind of like dredging and digging deep and bringing up that which might have been forgotten, resurfacing meaning both to bring to the top and to smooth over. This work, Danklands, that is set in Docklands, since Melbourne is kind of like on the other side of the world and like pretty globally peripheral, I just want to talk about some of the like forms, like the geographic forms that I map in this fictive work. And then also like, okay, anyway, I'm just going to read it. Okay, so now I just have some notes about Melbourne Docklands, the area where Danklands is set, and how this area relates to the error warning that I showed at the start of the presentation. Because I felt that necessarily a text that is kind of mapping a geographic place that is super peripheral and kind of janky and broken and like hidden, it just made sense that way. So there's the control pond queue, which is an underground place that is above the ground, in the more prominent and public structure of Balti Bridge, a large twin cantilever bridge which runs directly above it, cancels control pond queue out on maps. You can see on this map, it's like the green dot right down the bottom in the left. You actually just can't see it. And as far as I can tell, control pond queue is ungoogleable to the casual user. And while it's not physically roped off, no one goes there. It's like a council internal document enacted in real life, a piece of infrastructure, a material form in a location that is behind the scenes, like a DVD extra or an outtake. And to one side, right beside control pond queue, I'm almost done, is a fenced-off shipping container yard. And then the other side, the most convenient way to get to control pond queue is by walking around the back of Medibank Ice House, which is a giant indoor ice rink, and another setting within Danklands. You can see it. It's the I don't know how to point it out, but it's listed there, Medibank Ice House. But I think in this Google image, it's like in construction still. And then I was going to talk about the Melbourne Star, which is like another thing in the book, which is a huge Ferris wheel that looks really, really similar to like the London Eye. And this is like another shot that's so similar, like the pods. That's the London one, and this is the Melbourne one. Except the Melbourne one, it was a structure that was operational for 40 days in late December 2008. But during a Melbourne heatwave, which is another thing that I cover in the book, in January 2009, where there were 12 consecutive days over 28 and 3 consecutive days over 43 degrees Celsius, the structure failed. Cracks up to 3 metres long began to appear in the structure, though it was later discovered that these cracks had not developed as a result of the heat wave, but that the heat wave had just revealed inherent flaws in the original design. Like, it was always going to crack. And they rebuilt it, and it took like until December 2013. So it's back on, I haven't used it yet. But the structure was always going to fail. So this is like really tangential and oblique, but the way that it relates to this error message is just that this Danklands, operating as an analogue of Docklands, or a digital of Docklands, it made sense to me, and it was reassuring to me that Microsoft Word's spell check function just completely failed. It was like a cute and nice like kind of conversation between me and my software. I felt like it's saying like, oh, there are too many spelling and grammatical errors, but if you actually read the book, there's like not that many, but I felt like it was kind of trying to gesture to me that it didn't have the exact language to convey what it was thinking or feeling. So it was signaling the grammar issues, but it could feel kind of like the brokenness of like what I was talking about, because Danklands necessarily it has a few like non-normative spelling and grammar stuff, but the main thing is that what I'm depicting is like out of bounds, often broken, sometimes confidential. And so it was incredibly reassuring to get a supportive message from my software letting me know I'm on the right track. And I see you, girl. Emotional support, my software checking in with me to make sure we were on the same page and that what I'm doing is what I'm trying to do. Thank you.
I'm a Mac user, so this is really a headache to me. Oh, there it is. What I want to wait.
Here, Apple, and by Microsoft, and henceafter by Linux. And
okay. What I actually want to start with is a short excerpt of a symposium I was in last year, made by Frode Hegland at the LCC last year, and this year it was again at the Google headquarters. Sorry, my voice, by the way, I got a bit sick the last day. Who you actually see is Ted Nelson. A lot of people are familiar probably with him, others not. Yes, but he's actually talking about his 50 years ago ongoing Xanadu project, which some people heard definitely, and I liked a lot to show because you see a lot of his passion in it and the kind of idea that he had or ideals he had, let's say, and how the internet turned out in our days. From that on, I will go a little bit back to works from 2009 until I get actually back to a show that even finished yesterday evening. So I will start this for 3 minutes and 50 seconds.
so that's where everybody is right now. So their model of documents is the simulation of paper, rectangles, organizing things into rectangular presentations, and an obsession with the prettiness of lettering. Now, I love fonts. I designed my own font in college, but I believe that structure is far more important, just as the mind is more important than the hairdresser. Now here, this is the only working demo I have. This is the working demo I have. We paid the guy a lot of money for a cross-platform application and instead got a Windows-only demo, which we've been trying to get fixed for quite a while, but here it is. This is the kind of document I'm talking about. We're talking about parallelism of documents. Documents do not exist in isolation, yet we represent them in isolation. The doc format, the text format, the PDF are all by themselves. Where are the connections? We want to be able to see and follow the connections, and this is how I mean it. I'll worry about it. They can hear me. I can project.
No, that's the problem is that they're trying to record it, so you really do need the microphone.
I don't believe you, but all right. Here we have a flight of documents visibly connected. Here are the connections when they're stretched like rubber bands, and here are the connections when we see them up close. So we have 2 pages. This is only one of possible only one possible visualization. You see, along with the Xerox PARC propaganda of font representation of the costume party of pretty typefaces, came the phrase WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Meaning literally, what you see is what you get when you print it out. Yes, friends, this phrase WYSIWYG is propaganda for believing that that the purpose of documents is to create a paper simulation. Whereas if we have deeper structure that can't be printed on paper, our slogan is WYSIWYNK, what you see is what you never could. So this is only one visualization. In this particular visualization, we have two pages here. On the left, we see something I wrote for this occasion, and on the right, we see the origin of this quotation, because every quotation should be visibly and immediately connectable to its source. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and that is from the King James Bible translation. Go down to the next quotation, Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight, and that is from the alphabet of Ben Sira. And as we step through the successive connections, and we have both links and transclusions here, I don't have time to explain, we see the successive connections, the pages successively connected, leaping up to be next to wherever they should be next to. Now that is the essence of what I'm talking about, and I'll go on from there. So I don't know.
Interesting how you are so one-sided educated when you have a different system. Yes, this was Ted Nelson, and in between it was actually Finn Cerf, who's the one setting up the whole idea about the internet, let's say the physical part of it. I think it was the first time they met also there, so it was anyway an interesting clash, let's say, of ideas, and also that Ted says, like, I don't believe you, whatever you say. It says also a lot about this kind of historical gaps in perspectives of how you should treat the internet, or the idea of hypermedia, or in general. I come back to him actually again with a later work. First, I'm gonna just explain this work for a second. Let me go back a bit. Back in my practice in 2009, the imposition series is a part of bodywork that went back to earlier translations of information into form. The Manesse Codex, or also called Große Heidelberger Liederschrift, kept my attention while I visited the Wartburg in former East Germany. The castle, where Martin Luther also translated the Bible, was also known for its Minnesang competition, or some even say Minnesang war, an earlier form of poetry battles in nowadays. The evil word communication within the art is quickly made up to be too didactical or topical, but formed the guideline in my work. Here I was more interested in how information is communicated. My interest in the imagery of that codex arose by the symbolic qualities of the paper forms that seemed to me placeholders for a variable. You see the commissioner and the artist exchanging information. The artist, the Minnesänger, was a live medium and functioned in the Middle Ages as a mediator and entertainer. As nowadays poetry battles, he was reacting ad hoc on expectations and objection. The images function as pedestal for the ceramic. I look at those forms as a first primitive attempt to the transformation of material. Rather than interpret the aesthetics of the exchanging gesture, my attention was kept by the used material and the history of the form of figures come up with. This gap of information brought to my mind the questioning of an utopian direct and error-free communication. This was another work from 2010. Actually, language in that sense comes back in the idea of like cultural aesthetics or cultural visual languages. Down there you see a cuneiform, actually the Cirrus cylinder, which you see in the British Museum. I was doing research on, and there should be two official copies, and one is at the United Nations in New York, and the other one should be at the Azadi Square in Tehran. So I traveled to Tehran. I could never find the copy, but instead of that, I found this amazing multimedia display, which was actually pre-revolution, pre-revolutionary made. It contained like 50 kilometers of film, I think 20 slide projectors, and all kinds of different formats actually. And what struck me a lot was actually the kind of language and like kind of like kind of piling up of different meanings. So you had like cultural history in there, U.S. industrial history in there, and it was actually all done by a Czechoslovakian puppet theater group. So even in that kind of collision and like piling of cultural meaning, you had another kind of interpretation made in there. That turned out to be in that installation which you see over there. That's here in London at the Bloomberg Space in 2011, I think exactly. This is a work actually that goes a bit back to the idea of parallel structures that what Ted Nelson talks about. This work for me works a bit like a kind of, if you want to, like kind of Wikipedia site, while Ted Nelson would also criticize the idea about Wikipedia as it is just one-sided clicks, one direction clicks. What I want to hear was really to pile all the different meanings in one sculpture. Actually, I made it in New York in 2011 when I stayed there for a year, and when I arrived, there was the revolution going on in Egypt, and I was following it on Al Jazeera for 2 or 3 nights already. And the day that Mubarak resigned, I was walking on Broadway and bumped into a sneaker shop, where I found this amazing pairs of Vans Iron Maiden kind of merchandising sneakers, and they're also called Power Slave. As a tour was also called Power Slave, and it's actually kind of a complete kind of a copy of a tour they did in '86. It was the first tour that went over the Iron Curtain to Warsaw. And that was just reproduced in 2006, and they had this kind of combination with Iron Maiden made with it, with Vans. And what I actually did then, I took footage from the Revolution Museum I filmed in Iran. So actually after the revolution, there's a display made also in that Iran museum I talked about. And the soundtrack actually, which you hear with the footage, is from Sam Taylor Coleridge, called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is actually where the... Why? Which is actually the text that the album is actually made of. And so you actually have this kind of piling of visual footage, of sound, and everything, and like in terms of structure, it was the first time I was using this idea about parallel information. This is pretty recent, beginning of this year in Berlin, first time that I actually literally used footage, let's say text, to present it as it is. This is a show I did in this summer actually. And it was in the context of an art fair. I was invited by Art Cologne and by the Dutch Bank actually to do this context-specific work, and it actually played with the idea about markets and commodities in general. And this was actually called Hello Prediction data mining. Hello Prediction goes back to an API actually by Google, and I enjoyed a lot the idea about these predictions, that it's just around the corner waiting for you all the time. What I was actually doing, you see these kind of towers in the front, which are also called prediction towers. This is one section. It's called it was about new economies. And what I did also, I was doing all my research on Google research by translating it in Arabic and in Chinese. So what you actually get is a kind of total kind of chaos of languages and of meaning, and also which you as a visitor, let's say, doesn't give you a kind of linear reading of the show in total. I combined it here with like early trading history from the Nanda trading with Japan, the Dutch Japan trading, and and with actually the burst of the .com bubble in 2000, and let's say our days companies working with it. This is another work a bit earlier this year. It's called it's a part of that series. It's called Alibaba.com, and it's actually showing the kind of historical or the idea about how Jack Ma, the owner of Alibaba, come up with that word. And it's actually, he's just talking about it, that he was in a bar in San Francisco running out with that idea to call it Alibaba, asking people in the street, and they were all saying like, oh yeah, Alibaba, of course I know about it, and Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. And so actually just this clash of cultures actually that has not a significant meaning sometimes it has, really aroused my interest. This is one of this prediction tower where I also introduced the Gartner hype cycles actually in that they're actually doing for like the coming up years. This is the prosumer monument, I call it. It's actually footage of SanDisk machinery, or like let's say production plant, how they make their ships, together with actually footage of users like filming each other, filming totally random things from daily life. But you definitely have this idea about a cultural background, and you that really bring up the idea about you cannot not communicate in that sense. That's something that kind of abstract. I tried to find a form of visualization is actually the idea of social sentiment analysis, and as it was really difficult to find anything to visualize, I bumped into this company called SpyView, which is actually a company that sells you systems how you can spy your concurrents actually, and that is their campaign. You can see using like kind of artistic coloring, but also even like the structure. A campaign is a canvas. Your keyword, the ink, analyze each brushstroke, really grabs on the artistic idea of creation, if you want so. This is the last shot also, which is then based on commodities and what I think was said also before, like the idea that commodities or data actually more and more gets a kind of commodity, which is in the same way dealt with as with, for example, corn or lithium production, which you see in this video. And it's time over, I think. Thanks a lot. Sorry again for the voice.
Hi, that's all right. Okay, so I'm going to talk about just one particular artwork that I've made about a year ago, which Melanie felt that probably related quite well to the themes of the talk. But before that, I just wanted to give a bit of context with it, another work that I've been making, which kind of led to this work that I'm going to be talking about today. I suppose for some time my practice or my work has been dealing with, my work's not especially dealing with kind of digital language per se, it's more dealing with the relationship between, I suppose, the workplace, the post-Fordist workplace, and you know, the relationship between labour and language, which of course, you know, with digital labour and so on, it's now become more relevant to kind of look in both spaces. But the work that I wanted to start talking about is a project that I've been working on for a couple of years, which is a musical that I wrote called And You Were Wonderful on Stage, which I wrote while I was working as a copywriter at an advertising agency on a campaign where we were sort of working with clients to work with their employees to use the employees' kind of real life stories and aspirations and desires and so on to sort of take this language delivered in a kind of a spontaneous, naturally spoken, chatty kind of way, to sort of take that, reshape it, fill it with the brand values of the corporation and put it back in the voice of the employee to re-deliver to camera as TV commercials. And I went to work on this project for two reasons. Like, first of all, because I was broke, I needed to go to work, and secondly, because I wanted to go to work in a place that was I suppose, I mean, I guess like a lot of people that are interested, you know, I was heavily influenced by, for instance, like Paulo Verno's work, The Grammar of the Multitude, which very succinctly talks about how things such as like Hannah Arendt's notion of like what it might mean to kind of produce a kind of a political form of life, like through your speech and through your kind of actions, has been sort of kind of derailed by the growing shared behaviour between labour and speech, and therefore politics sort of takes on the same behavioural properties as labour, and labour takes on the same behavioural properties as politics or action, and there's a kind of an emptying out of our kind of political potency, if you like, or our potential for what Hannah Arendt would call action. So I suppose there was a desire to kind of go to a particular workplace that was using language in this particular kind of way, and to labour in that workplace. While I was working on this campaign, there were a number of different kind of current affairs, I suppose, going on in the world at that time. And I was also reading a lot of the work of Bernard Stiegler, who, as you probably know, is a philosopher who's dealing with the notion of what it might mean, thinking about technological dependency, or our kind of contemporary relationship to techniques and technology, and thinking about the kind of our use of technology as somehow pharmacological. So in the sense that it's can be a pharmacon, a technique can be a pharmacon, something that's both curative and also poisonous if it's used incorrectly. And he's thinking about sort of techniques broadly, not only as your sat nav or your iPhone or whatever, but also thinking about kind of Ritalin, institutions, the written word, like all of these kind of different forms of constructed life and existence that are used to orchestrate existence to make things easier in some kind of a way. So I was working at the advertising agency, I was reading Bernard Stiegler, and there were these kind of current affairs that were popping up in the media at the time, where I was sort of understanding them to bear some kind of a relation to the work that I was doing at the agency, and also this notion of being technically dependent in some kind of way. So the different current affairs were President Obama got inaugurated the second time round, and at the presidential inauguration, Beyonce sang the national anthem, but she chose to lip sync rather than sing the national anthem live, and sort of devastated America for failing to produce this live, authentic moment in some kind of a way. Also around the same time, Lance Armstrong had been kind of come out as having sort of lied his way through 12 Tour de France's or whatever it was, and been doping for 12 years, doping his cycling performance. But he'd just very recently gone on the Oprah Winfrey show to say sorry. And I was sort of quite interested in thinking about Oprah Winfrey as a technique, as this sort of mediated space through which you could kind of put your very human apology, into the public realm. So I was sort of thinking about the lip sync, I was sort of thinking about Oprah Winfrey. Another thing that was happening around the same time was President Obama's speechwriter, John Favreau, who was this very good-looking kind of GQ Man of the Year type person that used to write Obama's speeches in Starbucks, left his post as a political scriptwriter to go and write action movies in Hollywood, and various political dramas and so on, which I suppose interested in that notion of the president losing his voice and having kind of outsourced so much of his persona, such as the famous yes we can speech, to this technique, this other human resource that was now leaving him to go and produce fiction elsewhere. And various current affairs like that, a few more as well. And so from this, I decided to write a musical, which was called And You Were Wonderful on Stage, which was trying to think about this idea of, I suppose, what it meant to have to technically enhance your life or your performance in some kind of a way, and so the musical was for a chorus line only of women who would sort of come out of the body of an audience within a museum, and there was no, let's say, image or stage to this piece. I wanted this kind of spectacle to just purely emerge from their language, and the language they were producing was they were just gossiping about these current affairs. They were gossiping about the president losing his voice, or gossiping about, somebody, outsourcing their voice to their own recording 3 days before, or, so on. And increasingly, as they chatted, their voices would become more and more filled with the kind of the brand values and the jargon from the campaign that I was working on, which was increasingly performed as Broadway songs. So this kind of horrible, repetitious, emptied out kind of form of language would arrive within their speech, and what you just ended up with was a big musical kind of collapse, if you like. So that was A New Wonderful on stage, and I think there were a few things that came out of working on this project, which was quite large scale, and I was working, as I said, with about 26 women and a kind of a big team of people, and it started bringing up, I suppose, a lot of questions around my own dependency, if you like, on the people, the kind of the human resources, in a way, that I was working with. And I was sort of increasingly thinking about this idea of the hired body as a technology, and me having this relationship to these women that I was working with, and this crew of people that was helping me write the music or helping me kind of choreograph it, and how I was in some way outsourcing my own voice to this apparatus, but also thinking increasingly about my own dependency on the institutions which were hosting it, on the notion of visibility that was becoming necessary for this thing to drive itself because of its scale, and also this idea that rooted in the project was really the potential of working as a group or working as a community through processes of kind of devising, of conversation, of trying to find a way to I suppose produce a coming together of bodies of sorts that would generate a live activity that somehow felt within it that it might contain something positive within it. But of course, increasingly as it went on, it became clear that what I was just producing was a small workforce, or something that was no different to a startup or something like this. So there were these strange moment of kind of eating and being eaten going on, or somehow reproducing the same conditions that I was trying to not critique. It wasn't about critiquing it, it was just the same, I don't know, there was a process of eating and being eaten going on. I think that's the best way of explaining it in some kind of a way, and through that I was starting to think about, I was reading a lot of kind of Chris Kraus at the time, and thinking a lot about this idea of hysteria, I suppose, or the notion of desiring something and simultaneously rejecting it, or sort of needing to kind of speak in a kind of a minor way, but needing a kind of a major space to be able to do that, and sort of undermining your aims and intentions, and feeling like a conflicted being in some kind of a way through that, and just trying to sort of understand the state of hysteria as having a relationship to, I don't know, a conflicted being, a relationship between being a conflicted being and having a state of hysteria in some kind of a way. And so anyway, so that's the kind of the background to the work that I'm gonna talk about. And what kind of happened was that I was invited to take part in a group show at Kunstverein Munich, which was a show based on a play called The Human Voice by Jean Cocteau, which is a kind of an opera. It's a melodrama. How am I doing? I've got 2 minutes or something. So it's a monodrama about a woman who's being broken up with by her lover. She's on the telephone. It's a one-act play, and she's moving through a roller coaster of emotions, rejecting him and desiring him simultaneously. And it got restaged as an opera. For this show at Kunstverein Munich, which was very much about commissioning a group of artists to produce new work in response to this opera, I decided that I wanted to try and think about these ideas of this kind of awkward status of occupying this hysterical status of both wanting something and not wanting something simultaneously, and trying to produce a voice of hysteria in some kind of a way, but relating it to perhaps some of the current affairs that had been happening in the musical. So I'll just really quickly do this because I know I've only got a minute, so I use that thing. So what I decided to do was to use the kind of the current affairs as a starting point, and to try and like find where the hysterical voice in those current affairs was situated. And of course where it was situated was in the public voice, and it was in the public voice of, say, wanting Beyonce to be kind of live but wanting her to be perfect simultaneously, wanting Lance Armstrong to tell the truth but needing that to happen in a way that he was still a kind of a TV hero. And so I went to find the public voice in the bottom in the YouTube comments of the videos where where the public expressed their voice in response to these particular instances. And I took the YouTube comments and I turned them into an opera. And I programmed them into an opera surtitle device, which is simply an LED display, which typically is what you would use for the public to be able to follow the progress of an opera. But in this case, the opera surtitle device actually both helped the public understand the progress of the opera, but it also, this is the Beyonce opera, it also automated the performers who were having to sing directly from the opera surtitling device. I programmed it through improvisations that we did around the opera, so again they were being automated with their own, let's say, what was once their own sort of live, spontaneous delivery that I was somehow organising, and increasingly created this kind of situation where the singers become increasingly more melodramatic as the comments themselves become more contradictory, more demanding, more upset, but their relationship to the surtitling device kind of increases, and what you get is this this very awkward situation of somebody essentially being automated by their own voice pre-programmed and fed back to them. So I'll just stop talking now because I think we've run out of time, but it's pretty straightforward work, and you can see that it's quite dramatic, and it's delivered in the register of recitative, which is the sort of the speaking singing register of opera, traditionally the most free and open kind of part of the opera, but obviously there. That's the Lance Armstrong one. And then the surtitle device stays in the show for the period of the exhibition, and the opera singers arrive once a week or once a day to deliver one of the operas that's programmed in the device, which is the operas are 6 minutes long. And the work's called Damning Evidence, Illicit Behaviour, Seemingly Insurmountable, Great Sadness, Terminated in Annie Manor, which is pretty much what Nike said when they had to sack Lance Armstrong after the doping scandal surfaced post-Oprah Winfrey show. So that's what the work.
Cool. Okay. Thanks. I think the idea of the... Can you hear me? Is that closer? I think the idea of the conflicted being is kind of a great way to open up a conversation, and especially opera as the classic high art form, maybe as one pole of that hysteria of the conflicted being. And sort of to start with what results when you have these multiple registers of language sort of on parallel or overlapping planes, in different tabs or in one YouTube video that is actually a public service announcement, or a local, the language of a hidden space that you can't access via Google Maps, and these various sort of layers of vernacular and formalized language, which makes me want to come back to the idea of the meme as a new vernacular, and also to think about what that might mean in terms of what local is today and what a local language would look like, because of course there's the globalized aspect of English as a lingua franca, coding languages as supposedly beyond like traditional linguistic barriers. And I was hoping you could talk a bit more about whether or not you think the new vernacular is also creating a new sort of esotericism in terms of maybe electronic literature or some of these forms that are trying to retain like a high art value while the meme might be a form of popularism.
Yeah, but I would say, I mean, maybe it's helpful to explain that when I was invited for this talk, the expectation is that I would talk about code languages and their artistic uses. And for me, this particular kind of net art subculture of using, let's say, a new artificial language that was collaged from English, from slang, from programming languages, markup languages, doesn't really exist anymore. It doesn't have the vitality at all that it had 10 years ago. That's the first thing. But I also think that, let's say, you can find all the qualities of it back in the vernacular of the image boards. So I wouldn't make this kind of high and low distinction. And that also brings in locality, because what I see then talking about meme culture, image board culture, and its language in a, let's say, non-Anglophone context is that people are not getting it. It's really too complex for them. And you have people with PhDs in art history, media studies, and literary studies, and it totally goes above their head. And that's actually, and this is why I find Bachtin incredibly useful as a theoretician in that context, because he made exactly the same point. He said that the question of cultural, literary, artistic complexity is not one of the vernacular versus the high, but on the contrary, you often find the most complex forms of references in the vernacular. Not sure whether it's an answer to your question, but locality remains a problem, yes. I would say in the case of the memes, it's even a kind of hybrid locality. It's, for example, I would say it's almost a locality it's a kind of, let's say, based on an American perception of Japanese pop culture, and probably, let's say, the Japanese aspect of the memes is the one that most easily would translate into, for example, continental European popular and youth cultures, because their manga culture is just as known and popular and very much taking over as, let's say, the most influential form of popular visual culture. So that could actually create the link. So that also means locality is not something that is local in a traditional sense.
Right, certainly not necessarily a geographical sense, but Holly is from Australia. And you do mention that, I mean, whether or not it's about the distance or the geographical boundary in particular, your story is located in a site and a fictional version of that site, maybe fictional. And I've been interested in this work and also in other writing how, I mean, I suppose the idiosyncrasies of spell check certainly speak to that, like the fact that you're working maybe with a kind of vernacular that is related to internet culture or not. And so maybe you could speak to the idea of a local language also?
Yeah, I could. Yeah, I agree. I can't remember what I agree with. But, well, my perspective is that time difference is something that plays a really big part in my interactions with the rest of the world, especially when I'm in Australia, that to talk to people in the US or Europe, like at the moment, the time difference between Australia and between Melbourne and London is 11 hours, so there's just a couple of hours at the start and the end of the day where conceivably or likely you and the person that you're trying to speak to will be awake. And so that, I think, really, okay, I guess the first time that I went to New York, was the first time that I really got Twitter, because I'd been on Twitter for like 2 years, and, you know, like me, I would write some little poems, you know, like 6 words, like something cute, you know, press send. But then I went to New York and it was like, hey, who's in Bed-Stuy? Let's go to that like ice cream truck that just rolled past, or, you know, like whatever thing, or like come to the secret party, blah, blah, blah. Like all these things that were happening like in times when I was asleep, or like in locations that like kind of didn't mean that much to me, or kind of probably did because it's a global center. But yeah, so I guess that's one idea. Like that's kind of how local works. Like, you know, yeah, kind of filters the content, like filters the language that I'm like that I'm privy to, or
which comes back to the idea of dredging and resurfacing.
Yeah,
of course,
because you can go back 8 or 9 hours and find what people are doing when they're awake, if you want. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that what's interesting is, like, I'm actually pretty interested in the object icon, because you've shown that a couple times, the object that pops up when your spell check melts down, and that was making me think about like the skeuomorphic qualities of the interface, and how that still reinforces the primacy of the written word, which is something that we were talking about before as well. The idea that like the interface is based still on the book or the concept of the page. You have the Notepad app, you have the file folder, and in your case you actually have the volume, like a hardware storage volume is based on the idea of a tome. And in a lot of your work, it becomes a physical volume. So you have this series of objects called volumes that sort of resemble laptops, maybe. So I was curious to talk a bit more about the object quality of language, and how, I guess, the work that you make manifests in physical space, the idea, like maybe a skeuomorphic idea.
Yeah. Exactly, like manifest in space. I think that's where also I start with all the time. Like I am, I train myself as a sculptor. I'm actually not trained, but I am started with sculpturing and the extra value of physicality, let's say. And I think that's really something it continuously goes through my work, actually, like doubting what is the physical still, or like thinking about what it means in our days where everything can be like squeezed through a fiber cable. And what I also like shifted in my work was is actually not that I'm just interested in like kind of graphical user interfaces, but actually much more in kind of meaning of the piling of each information stroke, for example. And that's why I come back also to that Nelson part, actually. That he was wishing in his early days when he was starting with his process, was actually that it adds something to a book, let's say, or to a book page, actually, that there's this kind of universality, let's say, and he goes actually that far that it's actually like really will save the world in that sense. He got really that far that it brings up a kind of worldwide kind of data center in the idea of knowledge, let's say, which is exchangeable all the time, and which is not one directional but many directional, and exist in parallel structures. And that kind of let's say structure in general interests me while I'm doing my works. Actually, it's as if it's like algorithmically sculpturing, if you want. So what I also bring in is, for example, also mistakes in researches, for example. So what I actually do is also showing the kind of dead ends in researching in general, but also in the works. And by having it in different languages, you can also have a different kind of access to it. And so actually what I'm interested in is like both like the presentation layer and the data access layer. So it's really both in it there that I'm trying to construct, and not just give like a kind of visual repetition of what is out there, let's say. So so that is really like more like a structural concern than a kind of graphical concern.
Right, that makes sense. I think that definitely brings up the idea that language is always a question of access and restriction, and who or what machine is able to parse the data is the implicit question when you're talking about language as a form of data. I guess I was thinking about what you said in terms of language or information being like transdirectional and or maybe like either parallel or networked, and I think that's actually under question, the idea of whether or not that sort of free accessibility exists. And I think there is a unidirectional quality to language, especially when talking about instrumentalization of bodies. Because obviously the idea of like Oprah as a technic or Obama's speechwriter as a technic who is lending knowledge, like literally giving voice or speech to somebody who's instrumentalizing those words towards an end, suggests that there is a unidirectional quality to the way that information is transmitted, used, and abused. So I guess, could you talk a bit more about the idea of outsourcing language and what it means to inhabit somebody else's words in your own body, like either as an opera singer or as a president or...
Yeah. I think like I came... So I suppose I've been trying to think about this idea of, my work, I hire people. That's the main part of my work. Is that I hire performers, and increase. I used to perform in my work a long time ago, but I realised that there was maybe something, a reference missing, which was to do with this idea of literally outsourcing something entirely to someone else. And I actually think it works best when I'm not even there, when it's just a direct handing over of content to someone else to deliver. And I think the thing I've been trying to think about through that is, it's just simply the working body or the human body as a technology, which of course it is, And I was trying and thinking about human resources as well, and them as these mediations or carriers for. In particular for, say, a corporation, and trying to think about that idea of a sort of a corporation trying to become a person and a person becoming a corporation, and this being a very important part of business, now of being able to kind of to trade and to and so I suppose I'm trying, one of the things I'm trying to understand is when that doesn't happen, I suppose, or within what situations there's a state of conviviality or something, or I don't know, a kind of a situation that's not just based in friendships, that's based still in a kind of a workplace or an environment, or the amongst strangers, let's say, where it's possible to not be using another body as a technology, or what that space might be in some kind of way. But I think, I guess what I'm realising is that I think it was really this notion of needing kind of this moment where where a corporation could literally develop a body and a face and a being and a story and hobbies and loves and desires and all of this stuff, because you put that corporation in the voice of a worker, and then you make that worker speak about that, but with the kind of the corporation's values intact, because they've been shoehorned in, or kind of not even more subtly than that, I suppose, just they've been, I don't know, absorbed somehow, and I think I suppose what I'm saying is that I'm trying to understand what it might mean to produce a kind of, to speak on media without in an unmediated way, in some kind of a way, or without that kind of when we actually are able to speak without a technique, let's say, like when does that actually ever happen in some way, and where might that space be situated? And going back to the kind of the Hannah Arendt like argument of thinking about a state of action, of like speech and deeds, of doing and speaking, of kind of showing up, gathering together, not necessarily and not forever to disclose, but not disclose yourself, and do this in an unmediated way amongst strangers. And that being politics in some kind of a way, and just trying to understand where that space might be situated when that space of action, of gathering together, not necessarily not forever, is also just the same as a startup or something like this. So it's not very clear, I'm not answering your question, but that's just some of the stuff that I suppose I was thinking about through the work.
It makes sense, especially because you use the word conviviality, which was that, I guess, Ivan Illich wrote this book, Tools for Conviviality, in the 70s, which was this like proto-utopian idea of communicating, I guess, how technology would unite us all as convivial beings, but sort of didn't take into account the idea that corporations and large bodies of people would also become sort of like convivially related. But I guess speaking of outsourcing labor, I should open it up. I think we're about at that time where if anyone has a question, please.
Yeah. Wow.
Hi, thanks for the presentations and the discussion. I have a question for Cally Spooner about the piece of work in Munich you presented. Munich is a city that has a very strong local identity, and it seems like, despite the fact that that the city is full of technology industry, it seems very much that people really don't care so much about a lot of international phenomena or discourses. I think nobody in the city knows about the DLD conference that Simon Denny did a show about in the same place. The city is just very self-absorbed. How did people react to the work you presented there? Did people understand it? Did people get it, or was it something completely strange that you confronted them with?
I think they got it. It's not. It wasn't a terribly complicated thing to get. It was. There was. The work was framed in a way that it was clear that what they were singing was the YouTube comments. It was framed curatorially by Simon Bott, who curated the show, that the commission was that that I'd made was that they were singing these YouTube comments from these, this public distress or hysteria from these moments where there had been this kind of outsourcing to a technique in some kind of a way. And at some level, I think people got that, but I think there was also just a very obvious relationship as well, just simply through the performance of these opera singers being so heavily reliant on this device that they were having to kind of sing from, and that I suppose, without needing to know about the current affairs, if that's kind of what you're asking, like there was still this relationship of like being dependent on a technique, I suppose, was somehow kind of clear. But do you mean more or less the current affairs and more just like these ideas of technological dependency and like Bernhard Stiegler's ideas? Is it that you think that maybe Munich didn't get, or Munich didn't get the Munich problem? Because I think they got it. I don't know. It's quite an accessible work, I suppose. They were really, I don't know, like the opera singers are from Munich as well. That doesn't help, does it? Yeah, I think people got it. Yeah.
Hello. So you talked about this culture coming from Japan and influencing Western motor speaking, and I'm really curious about maybe hearing some of your thoughts on emojis, because obviously we use emojis like to talk, or at least a lot of us do. one of the things I've been thinking about emojis is that language is very performative. Like, you can kind of invent a word or whatever, like Danklands, and like it just means that because that's kind of how like we figured that language works. But emojis have like, you know, they're this kind of set number of pictures that's like decided by somebody else and often designed by somebody else. And Apple and Windows and Twitter have their own set of emojis. And like and Apple has encoded a lot of its own mythology into its emojis. If you look at them, this kind of, John Appleseed is this mythic frontier figure who like appears in like 6 Apple emojis. You just can't see them because they're too small. So I feel like the idea of like the post-structuralist performativity of language maybe clashes with this very defined and awarded to us idea of emojis. And I wondered if Holly could, I don't know, if some of you could maybe, I don't know, finish this question for me.
I'm just thinking about how people use emoji when they're sexting, or like that the eggplant is code for dick. Like, do you know what I mean? Like that there are certain meanings that Apple put in, but that you can kind of transfer that into whatever meaning you want. And I'm also thinking about archiving or like future like interpretation or translation. Like how, like this has actually, like, you know, I'm like imagining a world 300 years in the future where people are like, like then there was a whatever, like a star emoji, that must mean this certain thing. But like, yeah, that it kind of does, it has like a realm, but it's hard to pinpoint, except if you're like in that conversation, you know, like all language.
If I may add something to this, there's also a discussion of whether you could consider emojis as memes, and whether they're basically 2 forms of the same kind of cultural dynamic. And they were historically preceded by emoticons, which came from an American context and were these simple, typed symbols, and then spilled from Japanese culture over into mainstream computing. And I think the issue that you raised, namely that of corporatization and you could even say trademarking, is a very important one that we haven't touched upon yet on the panel. Namely, with the internet, for the first time, we have a mass medium based on a linguistic logic, basically based on language. So if you look at TV, analog film, radio before, those were all media that you could use even if you were dyslexic or if you were illiterate, whereas nowadays you can't even find something on YouTube unless you use words. And I think that one of the most brilliant art pieces on the corporatization and trademarking of language was made here in London by one of the first generation net artists, Heath Bunting. He had an article written about himself in an arts magazine where the journalist described how Heath in these early days of the World Wide Web already got estranged by its commercialization. And he took that article and linked every single word in that article to a corresponding .com address. So if it said Heath Bunting is an artist, then he would make a link text heath.com, bunting.com, is.com, and.com, artist.com, and then imagine this being like a 4,000 words article. Well, back in the time, I think this was done around 1994, 1995, most of the links were dead. But it only took a couple of years until every single word that he had used in that text actually linked to a .com, and it has become something like a social sculpture of the World Wide Web and the internet and domain registration, because then, of course, these .coms changed. Some went out of business, some were parked domains, some were revived again by new enterprises. So that and also through the kind of Googleization, searchification of the internet, trademarks have become much more important. It has become much more important for any kind of thing that you brand, and that could be even a lecture series like this, to have a kind of unique name that is easily searchable. And I think that's a kind of capitalist logic to language, where language becomes kind of search engine optimization. that is very important to discuss when we're talking about language and the internet.
Yeah, I suppose that's what I mean when I say language as data with commodity value.
Yeah.
And so I think it's quite interesting to think of the emoji library as a branded entity. Like it's a language whose symbols are invented by a corporation that we can select from and maybe modify or subvert. I don't know.
Just an observation that the emoticons that are useful on Facebook statuses actually always come with text. So there's an interpretation that actually you can, to use an overused word, hack. You can hack the definition of the emoticon if you go really, it's quite a laborious process, but it says or other, and you can actually add your own meaning to the different faces. But then the compulsion, the restriction is that they always have to be accompanied by some interpretation. You can't actually just use symbol in that case.
And I think if you then think about computational poetics, we could even go further back than the 90s to the 1960s and think of the French writers group of the Oulipo, the Workshop of Potential Literature, which included, among others, Georges Perec, Italo Calvino, and Raymond Queneau. And they were one of the first writers to engage with both mathematics and computation in that time. Few people know that Georges Perec, for example, was a computer operator in a sociology lab, actually a systems administrator. And the concept they came up with was writing under constraints, self-imposed formal constraints. So, and if you look at a novel, for example, like The Disparition by Georges Perec, which is a 300 pages novel written without a single occurrence of the letter E, just choosing words that would not contain the letter E, you already have an idea of that language is not just a space of freedom, but also a space of restriction. But that even under these restrictions, and in these days it could be a capitalist restriction of Apple choosing certain emojis for you, you can work around that. That this is also something that you can take as a kind of creative challenge. Something, by the way, also to be found in Eastern European Samizdat and underground writing of the 1970s and 80s, which took like the official party language and then subverted it.
I think this may have to be the last question.
Hi. I think Elvia kind of touched on this, but I'd like to ask about language barriers from a slightly different angle, maybe. It looks like automatic reading or the algorithmic analysis of communications data seems to be happening more effectively now through like computational statistical comparison rather than understanding the rules of language. So programs that can read statistically are indifferent to language differences. Like they could read something the same way, whatever language it's written in. I just remembered actually that I recently met someone whose app, a startup, was developing password protections through like tactile interaction with images rather than like actual letters or whatever. And I was thinking kind of how enduring do you think language barriers will be, or language will be as a barrier to communication?
I am not a linguist, and I fully acknowledge my English-centered perspective, but I know how much just even Google Translate has opened up my ability to communicate with other people or to check what's going on with different communities, and then also just on acute level, like when you're trying to Google image search something and you can't find it, and so then you try in another language and it comes up. But I guess it feels like logically that shouldn't happen anymore, that if you are searching for something, like say cat, like, and then you try it in another language, it feels like it should be now or should be soon that whatever language you put in your Google image search, like all of the data for that term in whatever language would come up. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know what that has to do with your question, if anything.
Yeah, you mean like including the translation immediately in the research algorithm?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that seems to be the next step indeed, for sure. Exactly what I said. What I do, like you, like I do the Google Translate all the time, actually, to understand. And one other thing is about talking about meaning and semantics, for example, which all these things that are lost actually in between while translating, for example. And I think that is anyway something that is just being started to give it like the idea of meaning, to bring it to a different state, let's say, and that it must be something that's added to written language or to human language, let's say. And I think that will be much more going into mathematics and semantics, actually.
I think your question was really brilliant because, and also thank you for reacting with Google Translate, because the statistical approach was what basically made Google the company that is today. They first used it on search engine, then they used it on advertising placement, and then they used it for translation, beating Babelfish, which was the older model. Basically, few people, Babelfish was always the joke of the internet because you got so crappy translations out of it. But few people know that it was the result of a 30 years, probably, I don't know, million or even $1 billion funded artificial intelligence project of kind of making computers understand human grammars and semantics. But also with, let's say, Google has perfected this the statistical approach on every level. So, for example, the Google Books project, scanning all the books and putting them into an electronic library, is basically for gaining statistical data to improve translations and to improve search results. Then Google Maps, again, similar thing, is the building block for autonomous cars. These autonomous cars drive on statistical computations.
Yeah, I was just going to say that also the captures,
right.
the pictures of text that you then have to type out often are kind of, because I did coding work, which is exactly the same, where like if on a form someone had written kind of an incomplete letter or a letter that a computer couldn't read, had to type in what letter it was, but Capture does that too. And
yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, and then actually when we're solving these captures, we're helping companies like Google, for example, to identify house numbers that have been shot by Street View, etc. And one could see this as a kind of dystopian Terminator scenario, you know, with Skynet rising, based on the discovery of the real power of language and linguistic computation. But I also think that with, for example, Google Translate, we also see the limitations of that, because the translations are still crappy. I mean, they're just crappy on a different level, or somewhat less crappy than those of Babelfish. So. And then, I mean, what is even scarier is that there's a whole religion attached to it, because one of the main developers of these kind of statistical algorithms for computational applications was Ray Kurzweil, who then founded the Singularity movement, and Google is the sponsor of the Singularity University. I'm just coming back from a very depressing public symposium of my own art school, which had a kind of opening speech from the Singularity University, and basically telling our design students how they should work in the future. So I think this is also a field of a political struggle, and I still see, maybe I'm a romantic, but in something like the anonymous movement or image boards, I see the subversive potential to fight that, and to still also fight for an alternative vision of how we should work with these media and not become Luddites in the face of the so-called singularity, which I think, fortunately, will also be crap, and the Google cast will crash, and they will kill people, and etc. etc.
And Florian, do you think the analysis of metadata, or like from and to whom, where, and when, is also a little bit to do with backlit?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get the first part of your sentence.
Are we thinking that the analysis of metadata, or from who to whom, where, and when, like that context specificity as a way of analyzing what is being communicated? Is that worth thinking about in relation to backlit?
Absolutely. I mean, that's maybe also where we are kind of naive. Huh? We are, if you think back to 20th century linguistics, Roman Jakobson was the linguist who kind of revolutionized thinking about language, in that he split up any kind of linguistic or communication act into several layers. And the semantic layer was just one of it, but then you had, for example, also the phatic layer, or non-verbal communication. And we still are, from a cultural tradition, particularly Western cultural tradition, literary tradition, we mostly think of language as something that is semantic, and we tend to trivialize, let's say, the metadata, right? The metadata is, let's say, the non-semantic carrier information, and we have seen with the whole NSA scandal how the mere fact, the information about information, or the information about a communication act, gives away just as much as the contents of the communication itself. So just knowing who has communicated with whom and is in contact with whom gives you enough clues and ideas. And there, I originally come from literary studies, and I find that very depressing that we have too little literature. I mean, we have seen a good exception today, fortunately, that reflects on that. Yeah? That the function, also the politics of language, has really changed to that degree, and that you simply cannot write like in the 19th century anymore. Which is still, if I go to any bookstore and go into the fiction section, then I really think what William S. Burroughs said when he said writing is 100 years, or no, he said 50 years behind the painting. But now I think it's really 100 years. Yeah. So then something needs to be done. A new kind of writing needs to be invented, and I rather see it coming from, let's say, visual arts, net culture, hacker movements, than from let's say creative writing schools.
Okay, Florian, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to stop you because we have a film that was meant to start about 3 minutes ago in here.
Thank you.
But I kind of want to say a huge thank you, because this is obviously the last in a series which has been fantastic. So thank you on behalf of the ICA to the Goethe Institute, Arcadia Missa, Goldsmiths, Melanie. I think we've all learned a lot, but thank you to our returning audience, which has been amazing to see so many of you come back. My colleagues and I are working on a summit for next May with Hito Sterol, and lots of what we've talked about over the last year is going to be feeding into that, and I will bombard you with e-flyers. But mostly, thank you so much to our speakers. That was incredible. And please join us on the bar, not on the bar, in the bar, to continue that conversation. Thank you. Cheers, guys.